I'm Mike Saunders. I'm CEO of Commonplace. And just for any of you who don't know anything about Commonplace, very briefly, Commonplace is a digital engagement platform for places. We've engaged 3.5 million people in conversations about the place that they live, work, or play. And by making it easier to collect, understand, and act on community feedback, we help local authorities and developers to make better, more inclusive decisions that improve planning and increase social value. And here you see a few of our housing and development customers. So, as you know, social value is defined in myriad ways. And almost 10 years after the Social Value Act, there's still quite a lot of debate about how best to build in and measure it as part of development. But the UN Sustainable Development Goals are a really good place to start. And I think pioneering developers, some of whom are on this panel, are delivering many of them through their development projects, which is really exciting. One thing we do know is that, that the views, the needs and the aspirations of the community are a really essential part of delivering social value. In our recent research we did called Engaging for the Future, we found that 75%, in fact, slightly over 75% of people want to be involved more in local decisions. So this is a huge opportunity. And using digital tools, you can do this. You can create a journey that tracks people, communities through place that they live, the design process, planning, construction, post-occupancy, and all the way back to a thriving place again. And whether you end up using a framework like TOMS, the Quality of Life framework, or the Social Value Toolkit, or indeed the UK Green Building Council's guidelines, or a number of the other frameworks are available, at the end of the day, the impact's ultimately about the people. And the recent report by the Institute of Economic Development, called From the Ground Up, recommended that community engagement form a central component of measuring social value in all construction development projects. So what are the benefits of embedding engagement in social value? Well, despite the logic of communities being at the heart of social value, engagement's often seen as quite difficult or quite costly. But this needn't be the case. And this is where digital comes in. Digital community engagement can yield highly valuable and cost-effective data using something like your qual from the Quality of Life Foundation on Commonplace, which you can see here. So embedding engagement as part of social value has a number of benefits. There's an input. You better understand what social value your community wants. You have a way of tracking social value, and you have an output. Better engagement actually delivers part of social value. Over half the people who respond to Commonplace feel more connected to their community just by responding. So I thought I'd share three important principles, I think, of putting engagement at the heart of social value. Firstly, you have to choose some kind of a framework. And I would recommend choosing one that recognises the role of engagement. Some prioritise it more than others. In particular, the Quality of Life framework is based almost entirely on a subjective approach to social value. Secondly, using the framework, create some benchmark questions that measure social value. Different communities have different priorities. And early in a project, engagement can be used to establish what these are. And once those are understood, you can create questions that measure progress against these priorities. In some cases, you can also benchmark these against things like the annual Quality of Life survey. And thirdly, embed these questions then at every stage of a project's life cycle, during pre-planning, planning submission, during construction, and post-occupancy. And by using a digital platform like Commonplace, the data that you collect and that you analyse throughout the project life cycle provides evidence of the social value that you're delivering. So a quick example, in fact, two quick examples. This is an approach we took with Night Dragon on the redevelopment of their site in Greenwich Peninsula. They're committed to delivering long-term community outreach programme, and they involve Commonplace from the very start to help implement the TOMS framework that they use to measure social value. And using Commonplace, Night Dragon created a community conversation using the questions about needs and priorities of the community. From this, Night Dragon established goals and outcomes and designed community projects that truly reflect what the community wants. And the consultation engagement resulted in really, really high support from the community, demonstrating the effectiveness of doing this really well planned and delivered engagement. It included strong interest from 25 to 35 year-old age bracket, which reflects the local demographics and demonstrates the kind of reach that you can get on a digital platform like Commonplace. And then in a very different context, Aberfeldy with Popper Harker and Eco World, where social value had to be of huge importance to the whole project. And in this example, an estate ballot was required. And so engaging with the community was a critical success factor in making sure that residents were confident of the long-term as well as short-term needs and views were being taken into account. So there are huge benefits, I think, to prioritising community engagement as part of social value. In particular, better understanding of what will ultimately deliver social value to any particular community. And if you do this with a suitable framework and with an engagement tool like Commonplace, you can engage and collect comparative data through your project, create a robust evidence-base that informs your project and brings the community on board and delivers a better outcome for everyone. Thanks very much.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks, Mike. And we all know that the recent government document on the future of planning is going to be all about digital and about coding and about lots of things that can be using this kind of data to give us a much more nuanced of understanding of what's really going on in places. So thank you very much for that. Okay, over to Catherine McCulloch now, from Merchant Land. And
Hi.
the question I have for you is, how do you embed social value in your developments and projects?
Great, thank you. So I've come here this morning to talk about social value from an SME perspective. So to just explain that, the kind of projects Merchant Land do would range from small 8,000 square feet SME schemes to larger 85,000 square feet, again, small to medium-sized projects. And since we rebranded and I took over in 2012, we've really made putting social value benefits as part of what we do. At that point in time, the Social Value Act had come in. That was very much focused at local authorities and encouraging local authorities to develop their own policies. It wasn't really telling SMEs to do that, but we had an aspiration to kind of weave that into how we built our brand and how we do business. And I also think from 2012 you could start to see nudge points coming through from local authorities on you might not have understood it was social value driving it, but things like local procurement codes and health impact assessments, maybe conversations that you have with design review panels. Certainly these themes have actually been coming through since sort of 2012, 2013, when it perhaps wasn't as hot a topic as it has been over the last 2 to 3 years. So the examples that I wanted to give today, I'll give a couple that are on some of our larger schemes, which maybe have a bit more scale to do something a bit more ambitious. But at the same time, I want to talk at the end about a small scheme we completed on in 2018 and took through planning in 2014 at Charlotte Street, which gives a good example of how even if something's not a particularly big project, you can look at lots of little incremental ways to weave social value into it. But turning first of all to our sort of larger examples, we have a scheme that we own at the moment that's at the final stages of planning in Brentford. And with that, we really looked at health, sort of health and well-being as part of our development brief and design project. Design brief. So with that, for example, all of the units are over and above minimum safe standards, regardless of tenure. 81% of all units, regardless of tenure, exceed private amenity space standards. We've gone over and above the local authorities' communal amenity standards and really looked at kind of active and shared travel. And we're scoring, I think, 91% on the Healthy Streets criteria. And I think we certainly designed those measures in very much aware of the health and wellbeing agendas set out in social value. Over in the City of London, we have an office scheme in planning at the moment. And with that, we were able to work closely with our business improvement district, which really helped an SME like us. We worked with the Aldgate bid, who had put together really quite sophisticated baseline economic analysis, looking at challenges in Aldgate where there's lots of new office buildings. Ours will be about 65,000 square feet, but the new high value job creation that comes with this new development is not necessarily accessible by local residents. That includes some of the poorest people in the borough. So we're working on that scheme to introduce, it will be a social enterprise offering not apprenticeships into the facility management side of the building, but actually creating a platform for local young people to be a pool of apprentices for our future tenants, so they can access more valuable, more skilled jobs for the long term. The last project I wanted to just touch on was our one in Charlotte Street, because it is smaller. The GIA of that is about 12,000 square feet, if we could just bring it up, because I think this is a really good example of how small buildings can work hard. So what we're looking at is it completed, but when we bought the building in 2013, it had been emptied by the previous owners, who had tried and failed on appeal to get planning on the site. It's a little TARDIS-like. Behind what we're looking at the moment, the Victorian Terrace, we also built 7,500 square feet of new SME office space. We've restored the retail units at ground floor, and what you're looking at on the upper floors is residential. But when we bought that site, the third building in the terrace actually had existing residents who'd owned their flats there since the 1980s. And our starting point with this building that had been deliberately emptied by the previous owner was to talk to those residents over a long period of time about what they actually wanted. And some of them wanted to stay in their homes, which we always respected from the outset. So the way we went about devising the planning brief for this scheme was to work on the basis we had to plan and build something where people's existing long leasehold homes were going to be retained on site during the construction. We got the trust of the households to do that by doing lots and lots of proper, genuine, when you call it engagement, it was meeting and conversations. Because that took a long time, we built that into our own financial plan, if you like, for delivering the scheme. And what you're looking at now with the retail units, we brought in 2014, these were pop-ups. Before pop-ups were necessarily as popular as they are these days, we had the Black Sheep Coffee Company's second ever London shop. We had Mac and Wild, who ended up operating out on the top of John Lewis, I think it was, afterwards, and a local art gallery. And we ran that on a not-for-profit basis whilst working with the residents to get a mixed-use scheme together that everyone would be on board with supporting before we went anywhere near the planners. We took that kind of approach on through construction. This was anything from training and recruiting local traffic marshals and more junior staff at site level, from doing Christmas hoarding at Christmas time for the local community, making sure we got local restaurants involved with feeding, both at hospitality events that we did, but also just with staff on site, doing subsidised local eating. And career days as well. We went along, we took our sales teams, construction teams, people from my office along to do things that Camden were doing with local schools. Now, as individual little acts, perhaps none of that sounds as impressive as a social enterprise apprenticeship in a 65,000 square foot office building or whatever. But I think the reality is SMEs like us up and down the country do small schemes like this, and we can all be quite creative about how to try and make them work hard. So that's it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Catherine. I think it's a really important message not to ignore the small things. In fact, the small things soften the blow of regeneration and can open up people's minds to what's possible. I think that's a very, very wise words there. Okay, over to Peter Connolly from Igloo. Peter, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so the question here is, can you tell us more about Igloo's footprint methodology and why social value is a key part of your business model?
Well, Igloo's been operating for 21 years. It's our 21st birthday this year. And from the outset, we've always operated in the social impact space. And that's been underpinned by our footprint policy, which we apply to every project equally. So it's not a pick and choose menu for us. We apply this to every single thing that we do, and it becomes part of the DNA of all of our projects. We've recently updated it so that there are now 6 themes, which link straight back to the UN sustainability goals, but they are based around the circular economy. So looking to recycle as much material as possible, engagement with community, creating place, climate, which is really about moving towards a zero carbon economy and world, well-being, which has always been a key feature for us, and nature, where we're seeking to carry out a net improvement to the biodiversity of the sites that we're developing. We use this methodology because we believe in it. We believe that we want to make the world a better place, one project at a time, focusing around our core themes about making the world better for people, for every project to improve people, place, and planet. Because we're working generally on regeneration sites at the edge of city centres, we find that by applying this kind of methodology, and particularly the engagement with community, which I'll come on and talk a little bit more about in a second, we actually help to create better places that then create value. So actually value creation and social impact go hand in hand on the majority of the projects that we operate within. So we have a large number of clients, many that focus as much on financial return as they do on social impact. But we find that by marrying the two and applying them correctly to the right places, then we can create the use of footprint is what creates the value, and we see them going hand in hand. Whereas many developers would see doing social impact as almost being a tax on financial return. A key part of what we do is to continually assess projects right from the outset. So we start every project with what we call a co-creation workshop, where we involve local stakeholders, the team that we've assembled to do the project, the local community and representatives of that community. And we get as many people as we can together to actually look at the site, look at the opportunities, look at what the site and the area has already got. So carry out some contextual analysis and try and create a shared vision for what we want the project to be. And that's before we've done any design work, any kind of, so we're not going in there with kind of preconceived ideas. We really start the whole process by listening, and then we take that right through the way through the design process, reviewing the project at key stages through, and then carry out 2 years after completion of the project, when the community's already been living in the space and enjoying the space, hopefully for that period of time. We carry out a post-evaluation survey, and each one of these assessment processes then feeds back in through a learning loop, so that our projects, hopefully, touch wood, become better at each stage. And then we also have an external footprint committee, which is chaired by Julie Herrigoyen, who's the chief executive of the UK Green Building Council, and there are key external members of that committee that look at each of our themes. And each year we carry out an audit, and the committee meet regularly, and they hold us to account for the fact that we are applying footprint and we are delivering impact, social impact, and improving the climate and the zero carbon agenda. All of those agendas we're held to account by this committee on a regular basis, and review this annually through our footprint audit. So it becomes the footprint process becomes what shapes our projects. It's what delivers value, but it's also a continual improvement loop to ensure that we're trying to do better with each project as it comes along.
Thank you very much, Peter. Certainly, Footprint has been a big inspiration for me, knowing that system was, with so little post-occupancy evaluation actually going on, and knowing that Footprint was happening, it's always been quite inspiring and encouraging to feel that as we've been building up impetus towards post-occupancy evaluation, which is really a shared responsibility, I would argue. Okay, over to Eime Tobari from COCREATIF. So, Eime, you there?
Yes.
There's a picture, fantastic. How important is collaboration in helping real estate investors and the developers create social value in their projects?
Thank you, Flora, and good morning, everyone. So I tend to think collaboration is the answer to almost everything. But that is the case for social value creation in real estate in particular. And I'd like to point out two main reasons. Firstly, social value is created over time across the life cycle of development. Collaboration across the value chain, from investors and developers to designers and asset or property managers, is really important. And for example, a socially minded developer called Stories, they retain the developer, but they actually retain 5 years asset management role after the completion to ensure the continuity of their intention with actual use. So for example, if they created a community space with a certain intention, they want to support the use of it by diverse groups of people as they intended. And secondly, social value is ultimately created and experienced by people, like all the other speakers were talking about. And our activity and experience is seamless across spatial boundaries, so asset or development or boroughs. So individual investors and developers need to look beyond their red lines. And so planners in public sector have an important role to play here. So for example, there is a big development called Porta Nuova in Milan, in the northern part of Milan. And they created a large open space and prioritized pedestrian connectivity through the site. So surrounding neighborhoods would improve their access to the city center. And thinking about the role of the development in the wider local context. And the space was also intended to become a social hub for to enhance the social integration for diverse communities around the site. So the local government also, in parallel, invested in the public realm and infrastructure in the area. So without which, today's success of the area wouldn't have been achieved. So over time, the developers' initiative led to a partnership with the municipality, as opposed to us and them, typical of developers and the local authority relationship. So there are similar examples in London and the UK, and obviously across the globe too. So in essence, while everybody in the real estate sector has a role to play, nobody can be responsible for people's well-being or community cohesion entirely. So we'll need an ecosystem around shared values that works together to create social value. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Eime. And if Aime's been working with Good Economy, who've been doing amazing work on encouraging funders and investment in social value things, but also locally. You suddenly start to realise that actually pension funds are very rarely investing in Britain or anywhere outside London and things like that. Such an exciting realm going on at the moment, I think, in this zone. Right, so we've got very good attendance at this session today, I'm pleased to say. So please just put some questions in the question and answer. We're very happy to receive some questions from you. In the meantime, I'd like to ask about what support you think, as a group, what support do you think is needed to prioritise social value in the real estate sector? Is there anything particular that needs to happen to get it further up the agenda? Peter, are you volunteering? You're not. Anybody got any thoughts on that one? Eime?
Yes, thank you, Flora. And thank you for mentioning the reports and research work that I have worked on with the Good Economy for the Urban Land Institute. And actually, through that research, what we identified were quite a few things across the system needed. But one of the things that what we thought the priority was that to start with a common understanding. Because we really need to, as I mentioned earlier, that the collaboration is really essential across the value chain and across geographies and in all directions. So starting with a common understanding as a way to begin aligning everyone's interests and activities would be quite important, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Some questions coming in now, some really good ones. Here we have one from Gordon Seabright. How do you see art and culture contributing to the generation of social value? Gordon's from the Creative Land Trust. Anybody want to volunteer for that one? The role of art and culture in all of this?
So we're landlords as well as developers. And we found creating links with local communities. Art is such a great way of doing that. Culture is a great way of doing that because it's really visual and it can weave your building in so quickly. So we've done things like bringing in local art groups to run temporary. This is in our buildings, temporary galleries out of ground floor units, out of redundant office units, that we haven't tried doing it yet in a long-term way, which I think I've met Gordon a couple of times now. He's come to a couple of my buildings and we've talked about this. But there's a really, really interesting offering that he has where you're looking at that over a 25-year term. And I think it's a brilliant way of bringing your building into the community in a really visual way. So I think it's a really interesting space.
Thank you, Catherine. I mean, it's something, the role of arts and culture in social value is something I tangle with quite a lot. I mean, if we see the world as a sort of triple bottom line, environment, economics, and social, so where is the cultural world in all of that? And I think coming through the indicators, particularly ones like the Quality of Life Foundation, there's a world of wonder and things like positive emotions and engagement. And I think those are the tool. We have the beginnings of a way to begin to evaluate and bring in the arts and creative people who are clearly fundamental thing, but often get marginalized, I would say. I think it's a really good question.
That's the economic vibrancy as well, because it brings footfall in people where you have music and you've got colour and you've got arts, people are drawn into areas which is supportive of the local economy, the bigger economy. I think it's all pulls in the same direction.
Yes, well, I have heard tell of cynical developers using pop-ups as a way of raising land value, which indeed it does do by increasing positivity about places.
I think it's quite important, though, to think about, I mean, the reason that people are actually wanting connection with city centre is for better access to culture and the arts, and actually by clever use of meanwhile, as we call them, or temporary facilities within buildings, while another use is coming in, we've also actually designed shop fronts to be kind of dummy shop fronts that are always used for permanent art displays. But also, I think putting artwork into external areas, not just about sculpture, but actually involving artists in the design of external places, so that there are themes to it. All of these help to create place that attracts people to come and live with them. So we think that involvement with local artists and art groups are quite a critical part of the projects as we develop them through.
Yeah, thank you. So we got a really nice comment from Kerry Sunu, who says that she works with an orchestra who are working with a housing provider to create activities to remedy isolation and loneliness amongst elderly tenants. That sounds great. I'd like to hear more about that. Okay, we've got a question here from Jesus Bayari. Which guidelines or framework would you recommend to guide during design and measure social impact on real estate developments? We've heard about a few frameworks. Does anybody want to say they've got a favourite?
I'm happy to have a go on this, Flora.
Go for it, Mike.
And I suppose I haven't got any particular kind of invested interest in the sense that we don't have our own framework. And I think, the great thing is there are lots and lots to choose from. So you can really choose one that fits your own aspirations as an organisation and, what you want to do with the project. And they do different things. So, the TOMS framework is really good for economic and objective measures, I think. And the social value portal, for example, uses that. And I know is quite popular in the sector and I think is really good. Flora's own social value toolkit, I think, is amazing and has really, really interesting principles and activities. And the Quality of Life Foundation, Quality of Life framework, I think, is super, super interesting because it does create a framework for how communities themselves feel about development. So it really standardizes a way of having conversations that resonate with the communities. And I think that that's something that is sometimes quite hard to do, is to from a standing start, get to a point where you can really have those conversations in a way that the community wants to have them. So I think that's a really exciting and innovative development that you can use to really get the conversation going in a meaningful way.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for mentioning the social value toolkit for architecture. I mean, we did that because the existing social value frameworks did not seem to be paying any attention to the benefits of well-designed buildings. Maybe that's a large and sweeping statement, but I think the understanding of the importance of design, both during the construction phase and the long term, is really going up the agenda, which is exciting to see. And Roland Cartos of Matter Architecture makes a really important point. Surely, for true social value, shouldn't the framework itself be co-created at the outset? I think that's absolutely right. But then again, we're trying to compare apples with apple and eggs with eggs and things like that. But yes, the most pure and best done social return on investment is done with the people themselves. That's a really good question. Nikki Davis asks, does the panel think the communities understand the term social value? What do you think about that? Anyone want to answer that one?
I think people don't always understand the jargon that goes around it, but I think people understand benefits to the community, and I suppose there are different ways that you would introduce the subject when you're talking to the community, particularly at the early stages of a project, when we're doing our co-creation workshops right at the start, and we're looking for people that are going to take on responsibility for things. I don't think we ever sit there and say, this is social value or this is the social impact that we're going to have. But you try and there are things that the community will want to achieve, and it's by achieving those. We might give it the badge social impact, but the community will just think, well, we're getting a scheme that we can support. It's going to improve our neighbourhood, and they can see benefits. They can see places and spaces that they're going to get brought back into use, that they can also enjoy. They're not just the domain of the people that are being brought to live there. In fact, there are many places that these people will want to go and enjoy themselves. And also, that they'll want to go down and use the facilities that are there. So, and enjoy the green spaces, enjoy the art, enjoy whatever it is that we're putting into the space. So, that yes, we wouldn't use the badge social impact, but they certainly understand community benefits.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Social value is a horrible term that nobody really understands, but we kind of understand the intention of it, I think, towards well-being. But I think you have to keep using.
Oh, sorry, I interrupted.
Oh, carry on, Mike.
I was just going to say that I think just adding on to what Peter has just said, which I completely agree with, I think that what communities understand really well and really fundamentally is their own needs and their own desires, right? So I think that the challenge for social value is to have the conversation in a way that fits their understanding of their own needs and desires. And I think, you know, it's such a good question. And actually Roland's point is also really important. And that bit at the beginning that Peter talked about, where you are co-creating the vision for a place, I think is so important. And if you can use that as an opportunity to create a benchmark and, you know, do that in a way that can then be benchmarked throughout the project. I think one of the things that we've seen throughout COVID and lockdown is the increased energy and enthusiasm that communities have for their communities and for being more connected with their communities and more able to influence them. We've seen that absolutely with certainty. And I think it came across in our research, you know, 3/4 of people saying they want to be more involved in these conversations about the places that they live and work. So I think there's a huge opportunity, and whatever kind of approach you take, if you can put the community at the heart of it, and you can find a way of summarizing the collective needs of the community. And I think that's a really important point. You know, it's not about being able to satisfy everybody's individual needs, but if you can summarize the collective needs of the community and do that with data and do that in a way that you can then benchmark it throughout the project, then, you know, that's a good start.
Thank you. Catherine and Eime, do you want to add anything? Shall I move on to the next question?
I can maybe add just one small comment that I think it's, I do agree with everything that Peter, Mike, and was saying. And I think that relates to trust. Again, the co-creation creates trust. As Mike just said, it's not about responding to their individual interest. It's about creating a vision for everyone based on trust. So yes, it's more of, I've heard someone saying that social value, the value, let's use that as a verb, not as a noun. And I think that is really important to think that social value is almost a process.
Thank you, Eime. Yes. Okay, a question from Martina Juvara. Social value is obviously a shared common good. Has anyone of the panel done a matrix of who's responsible for what? Public sector, communities and investors all have a shared responsibility for social value, but also other objectives. Now, that is a great question. Anybody want to answer that one?
I will. We're a small business and I have a team of 5 people. So you can imagine on lots of things like this, I have to do a lot of the thinking and planning to start with. We don't have divisions and realms. So we put together, we work off for things all the time, matrices and how we can bring different parties in and where we can influence and where we can't as much. I think that for the question that came before about do communities understand the phrase social value? I think you've also got to understand that at the SME end of development and landlords, not necessarily everyone's going to be really clear on definitions either, because how can you when you're also running a business? You're also having to do your own investigations, your own research. And I think making things as discernible. Most SME developers are innovative, embedded in the local communities anyway, because you're operating at a human scale and like to find ways of doing things creatively. But I think it's equipping them with the concepts and the tools and the objectives in a way that you don't need a PhD or a full-time research person in-house to help you decipher through pathways.
I think that's great. So, Catherine, within our process, within Footprint, we from the co-creation workshop onwards, we produce something called a footprint action plan, which is a way of breaking down, the vision of what we're trying to create into a series of objectives, and then these are, many of them are taken on by the Igloo team, but quite often some of the aspects will be taken on by external stakeholders, community groups, and particularly the local authority, who often have the ability to influence and carry out works that are of a major improvement to, you know, the wider neighbourhood that we're working within. So and what this allows then people to do is to take away their areas that they're responsible for, work on them, develop their ideas and thoughts on how they can deliver their aspect of the project, and then bring it back to the overall assessment at key stages, and we can review what it's capable of doing. So, for example, we've spent quite a bit of time in Newcastle working with Newcastle City Council, trying to bring forward development to the rear of the railway station, and we've just started on site a project to refurbish the pattern shop, which is part of a suite of buildings where Stephenson first built the rocket, the first train, and that project wouldn't have worked. It was originally a vision that came out of the co-creation workshop to do it, but this was something that, you know, the local authority, together with various grant authorities and bodies, have worked together with Igloo, but primarily driven by the local authority to bring forward that aspect of the project, which will bring forward, you know, bring back a building, an important building, into public use and public, you know, life again. So those sorts of aspects are quite often delivered in that way through, we call it a footprint action plan, but it could be an action matrix or something.
Thank you, Peter. That's really helpful. I'm going to squeeze in one question before we have some wrap-up round, which is from Richard Webb. A lot of social value benefits being talked about require long-term management and curation. Is this something considered, proposed? And if so, how is this delivered?
I'm happy to start off on that one, Flora.
Please, Mike.
So it's a really good question. And I think one of the things that we are offering now is the ability with a digital platform to be able to embed whatever framework you want to use within a digital engagement process that starts at the co-creation process, goes through various stages of planning, goes through construction, goes through post-occupancy. And indeed, you know, in many cases, that's a cyclical thing that happens several times. And the benefits of doing something that's kind of anchored with a digital platform is that you can keep the information that you're collecting in a consistent way throughout the whole process. So you're not having to deal with lots of different reports and spreadsheets and so on that you're trying to consolidate together, because you have it all in one place, and it's embedded in the way that you're doing the engagement throughout the whole scheme. Now, that's not to say, and I just wanted to stress this, that I think digital is the only part of the engagement process that's important, because of course it's not. And everybody in fact has talked about what they've done face to face, and that's a crucial component of it. And I think one of the interesting things in terms of this engagement sphere is going to be how the hybrid of digital and face to face works together in the future, because we've seen through the pandemic that digital can work relatively well. But what we haven't yet found, we haven't yet tried really, because we haven't had the opportunity, is how does it work properly alongside all the great things that Catherine and Peter particularly were talking about? How do you make that work as a holistic, integrated experience, and one where you can collect everything in one place and embed it as part of all the various different touch points of engagement?
Thank you, Mike. Does anybody else want to add anything on that question? Peter.
Yeah, I can just unmute myself. I think Catherine's mentioned this earlier on as well. Is that I think you can't have the attitude of what I would call a traditional trader developer to deliver long-term social impact. You know, I think that you've got to have some connection with place long after the properties are finished building, you know, the new and people have moved in. So we tend to stay for at least 2 years, but quite often we'll stay as friends to the community groups that we've set up. And we always set up, for example, you know, a management company that deals with that manages all the common parts, owns the freehold of the whole site. So we transfer the freehold of the whole site into that management company. And the freehold of the properties as well. But we also then stay and support that management company, you know, for as long as they need us, really, until they feel they can manage it themselves. We also have a process called a community chest, where we pay, instead of paying a small amount of service charge, we take a small amount out of that pot and put it into wider community good, which enables the community to link in socially with their surrounding community. So the spend from that pot, which isn't a great deal, it's thousands of pounds, it's not hundreds of thousands of pounds, but we do collect the money, and it goes into local community groups, creches, buys play equipment for play groups and what have you. But there will be people who live in our scheme, but people who live in the broader community that will make decisions about that. And again, we support those things for a while. So yes, I think the point's well made that all of this is there has to be a long-term commitment to place, and you just can't do your building work, hand the keys over and walk away. It's not the way it works. And I'm sure that Catherine would be of the same view.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to wrap up now by asking everybody a quick fire question about what piece of advice would you give the audience about how best to achieve social value? So if you will prepare to do a quick answer on that one, I'm going to start with Mike.
So at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I would say find a way to make sure that communities are at the heart of your entire thinking about social value, and particularly to understand their needs and desires. I think that by doing that, and perhaps by using something like Commonplace as part of the mix that you put in place to deliver that, you can not only create the understanding and therefore be able to deliver on that understanding throughout the project, but you can also actually deliver some outcomes through the engagement itself, things around influence, control and empowerment. And we found that, as I said earlier, respondents feel connected to their community just by virtue of having responded. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. Thank
you, Mike. Catherine.
Hi, I think Flora, you'd mentioned the term cynical developer in a little bit earlier, but I think everyone's got to be really careful. The more this has become a hot topic, not to get into sort of social washing. And for me, that would mean not forcing like little token solutions on people. I'm going to come and plant you some trees. If that you need to listen to people properly, be genuine about what you're doing, but also be realistic with in my case, the people that have the purse strings behind me, the local authorities we're dealing with, the communities we're in, about what's aspirational, what's achievable, but don't turn into trying to make yourself out like Mary Poppins and just not doing much, or coming across like you've been cynical, because that could really damage it for the industry.
Really good point. Thank you. Eime, what about you?
Yes, thank you. I do agree with Catherine. I think my point would be really follow up on that. So I was going to say that to find shared value, I think that is really a good starting point. It's not just about responding to the needs and struggling to find a way to make a business. I think it's starting from the shared value where community needs and aspirations overlap with your business requirements, and the capacity is really important to actually make a real step towards that.
Thank you very much, Eime. Peter.
It's hard not to agree with what everybody's been saying. I think the things to me are start early. So start before you've done any design, engage with people at the very early stage, and communicate effectively at all stages through the project. And picking up on Catherine's point, be clear about what you are doing, but also be clear about what you can't do and why. And make sure that before you start to do anything, you understand as much as you can about what's already there. How does the community already work? How does it tick? And don't come in with ideas that you can impose a scheme on people or impose ideas on people. The worst thing that we can happen is we come to an area where we're not familiar with, and then come with our big ideas from London or Manchester, or wherever they think we're based, to impose those things on a community. No, make sure that you're aware of what's already there. And I think the other word I would use is be accessible. At all stages through the project, make sure that people see you, know it's Igloo that's working on the project if it's one of ours, but make sure that you're accessible and people know how to get hold of you and to continue that communication, so that you're there to listen to them at all stages as well as communicate back to the community.
I think that's a really important point. I'm part of an organisation called the UK Collaborative Centre for Housing Evidence, and we did a project on average housing estates. It was unbelievably difficult to find anybody who would admit to having built these housing estates. Everyone was running away as fast as they humanly could, did not want to be associated with them. And I think that's a very sad indictment for a lot of the kind of housing we're getting in low value areas. So yeah, long-term relationship, that's great. I can't resist. Robert De Jong has asked, anybody have got any ideas about shining examples of country, city neighbourhoods where this is happening? Has anybody got any hot tips on that?
Well, I think our Oosburn scheme in Newcastle is a classic where we've taken sites that were took 10 years or more to come forward for regeneration. In fact, we've just completed was completing the second phase of housing there now. But I was up there last week, and we put some shop units in the ground floor of the first phase. And I must admit, at the time we were designing them in, I never thought that the community would use the footpath along the river that we put in, because it was the wrong side of the river and various things. But to see people, teeming along there, enjoying the sunshine, popping into the shops to buy bread from the bakeries, etc., enjoying the areas, just made me feel, yeah, that's good. And it's won awards, but actually the most important thing to me is that it's actually created a stronger community, and I can see other developers doing bits with their buildings that have nothing to do with us that have benefited from it. So I think that's a good example from the Igloo portfolio.
Anybody else want to add anything? Mike.
Well, sorry, I was going to mention something briefly, which is we've been working with Waltham Forest Council for several years on their what was originally called MiniHolland programme, which is a cycling and walk kind of strategic cycling and walking regeneration across the borough. And I think they did a really good job and are still doing a really good job of building in many of the things we've been talking about. So engaging really early, setting up a vision, engaging throughout the project and feeding back and communicating on that vision, and then delivering some incredible outputs at the end, which is not just the physical delivery of the infrastructure, but the impact that's had on air quality in the borough, which has been absolutely tremendous. And a King's College study found that I think 40,000 additional years of human life will be created just through the improvements in air quality. So that certainly for us has been one of the projects where we've been involved right from the very beginning through to delivery, and then some really interesting spin-offs, like members of the community who originally engaged online and have then been involved in volunteering to be part of upkeeping some of the new pocket park spaces that have been delivered as part of the project. So sort of some really quite interesting legacy that's come out of it as well.
Thank you, Mike. I think actually there's a very growing body of great work going on out there. And actually one of the tasks is to publicize these really great examples so as much as possible, so everyone can use them to get inspired by and make things happen. So just a quick roundup from me. First, I'd really like to thank our fantastic speakers, Mike, Catherine, Eime and Peter. Thank you so much. It's been a really interesting conversation. And thank you all for the excellent questions and comments that we've had through. They're very much valued. I'd just like to round up by just saying, I think what's come through very strongly in this conversation is this has to include the community. They have to be right there at the start. They have to be, social value cannot be an empty top-down thing, and you have to value the small incremental things that make social value. So it's not about building a giant stonking great hospital that no one can get to. It's about small things. We have to learn to value the small things that add up to something much, much greater than the parts. And I think conversation about 15-minute neighborhoods and things may help that. Got to be real, got to be at hand, got to be there for the journey. Facilities management, one of the fastest growing industries in Britain, huge opportunity here. And this whole world of measurement and impact measurement and so on is incredibly important. And I would argue that social value shouldn't just be accounted for in numbers. You need to spatialize and say where it happens. And this is where a lot of my work has been going on. So I think there's tremendous potential in the green finance world around social value bonds and green impacts as too, which we haven't really had a chance to explore here, but I think going forward is going to become very, very important. So I'm going to wrap up here by saying social value is here to stay. I hope this session has inspired you to get involved if you haven't already got involved, because often these things are preaching to the converted. And of course, social value is there in the Treasury Green Book and the way that we measure cost-benefit analysis of the government, and it's going to be there in the Construction Innovation Hub procuring for value tool. So it's very sensible to get your social value ducks in order for the new era that we find ourselves in. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Flora, and thanks to our panel for a fascinating session. Really has opened up my eyes. This term that we all use quite freely, actually there's so much more to it, and it is such an important subject. So thank you to everybody, and thank you to those watching and inputting through those questions, which has been really, really great. Now, looking ahead, we'd be delighted to get any of you that are watching to tune into our other sessions that are coming on later today. It's come up on your screen now. We do have a lunchtime talk with Mark Robinson, Chair of the High Streets Task Force, happening at 1 o'clock. And then at 2 o'clock, we're heading down to South Croydon, South London, and we have a virtual investor tour of the district centre called Purley. And I just also want to just give a shout out that tomorrow morning at 9:30, we have our London opening keynote spot in partnership with U Capital. And that's going to be talking about keeping London on a level and just picking up on this healthy theme. Again, tomorrow at 10:30, we'll be looking at promoting healthy places and how can real estate create healthy places for all, which obviously does tie into this conversation that we've been having. But for now, as I say, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much to our panelists. We look forward to seeing you at one of our sessions later on today or during this week. Thank you and goodbye.